that's the origin of America First. This, as far as I know, this was not pointed out in any of the corporate media, which also has a lot to answer for in terms of giving literally billions of dollars of free airtime to the great prevaricator in the White House. And that continues. And this is perfectly in line with what Joseph Goebbels, who was Hitler's Minister for Propaganda, actually his actual title was Minister for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. I know it's Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. And you know what he said in the early 30s, before the Nazis really took power? He said, the main thing is they are talking about us. That was the main thing. And every day we see, and I was just watching the afternoon talk shows and morning talk shows, it's all about him, his latest outrageous comment, his latest slander of this or that person, his latest incredibly sexist remark, racist remarks, calling women dogs and horse faces and telling members of Congress that they're Pocahontas or they're have low IQ, or LeBron James, the basketball star, having a low IQ. It's really amazing that this kind of rhetoric is given so much attention, and it's why do people turn to demagogic impulses or demagogic tendencies, which are so prevalent right now. And propaganda is certainly part of it. And I spend a good deal of time looking at some of these right-wing sites, because we have to know what they're saying. What well are they drinking water from? So if you look at Newsmax and the Drudge Report and Red State and Breitbart News and InfoWars and Fox and Tablet and AllDrive.com and all of these other extreme right-wing websites, you have an understanding of what people are feeding on and why then they regurgitate what is coming out of Rush Limbaugh's mouth or Sean Hannity or Ann Coulter. I mean, again, it's stunning that people like this, like Hannity, like Coulter, like Limbaugh, have such influence over state policy. As Goebbels said, and Hitler as well, I'm paraphrasing both of them, with constant repetition, we can convince people that heaven is hell and hell is heaven. It's just a matter of repeating the line over and over again. And Goebbels said, I can convince people that a circle is a square and a circle and a square is a circle. These are mere words that can be molded, and we intend to mold them. So understanding propaganda is absolutely central to liberating ourselves, but also learning about what other people are being exposed to in terms of their information. Now, yesterday happened to be the national holiday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was born actually on January 15th. And we had I would say, the usual kind of celebration of Dr. King. I Have a Dream speech is often played. But King himself underwent a remarkable transformation in the years following his I Have a Dream speech. And that Dr. King has been largely occluded from view, largely blocked out of history. But that King moved from a strictly race analysis of the ills of American society to start talking about imperialism, about military aggression, about the unfairness of a capitalist system that concentrates wealth in the hands of very few. If you look back at his Riverside Church speech, April 4th, 1967, where he broke his silence on Vietnam, and every time he says the word Vietnam, if you put in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Egypt, Somalia, and other countries, you don't miss a beat, because the U.S. has not changed actually that much since he made that particular speech, in which he said the greatest purveyor of violence in the world is the United States. and he condemned the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism. This took quite a bit of courage on King's part. No one counseled him to make this particular speech, but he felt morally obligated to break his silence. And there was a remarkable op-ed, and hats off to Michelle Alexander, author of The New Jim Crow. I don't know if you saw her op-ed in Sunday's News of the Week of the New York Times, in which she said, "It is time for me to break a different kind of silence," reviewing the King record on Vietnam, and then talking about her silence on Palestine and how this was an important moral and human rights issue, and that she had been reluctant to talk about because of cultural pressures and for other reasons. It's certainly worth looking at, and she's become, I think, a regular op-ed columnist for the Times. But getting back to Dr. King, he's been shrink-wrapped and formatted to be innocuous and non-threatening. So there are dream speeches, desegregation, sit-ins, voting rights, Selma marches. All of those things could be accommodated. But when he started talking about the system, about structural violence of the system, then he became a danger to the establishment. And in New York at the Riverside Church speech, he said that Vietnam was a symptom of a far deeper malady. And then he added, "We as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It is not haphazard and superficial. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring." By giving that speech, Martin Luther King essentially signed his own death warrant, and he was murdered exactly a year to the day after the Riverside Church speech on April 4th, 1968, on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, where he had gone to in solidarity with striking sanitation workers in Memphis, and he was about to go to Washington to take part in the Poor People's campaign. Poverty continues to be endemic, particularly among African Americans. In some ways, Martin Luther King was murdered twice, not just on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, but in killing his revolutionary message. He's been, all those rough, sharp edges have been kind of sandpapered over, and so he becomes a non-threatening figure, which allows even the tweeter-in-chief and his chief butler to go to the King Monument and lay a wreath and mumble a few words about Dr. King. King called for a radical redistribution of the economic and political power, a revolution of values. We must see now that the evils of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism are all tied together. The whole structure of American life must be changed. These are words of prophecy that I believe resonate today, and that we need to be talking about, not just getting lost in the media kind of fabricated vision of Dr. King, which is very unthreatening. We are, though, as Eliot says in Four Quartets, distracted from distractions by distraction. There's so many demands on our eyes and our ears. The internet in some ways and the iPhone and the Androids have become an enormous consumer of our time and our attention. And I'm not against that, but if it's at the expense of engagement and activism, then it's producing, I think, negative effects. I wasn't Muslim, so I didn't say anything. Then they came for the Arabs, and I wasn't an Arab, I didn't say anything. Then they came for the gays, lesbians, and transgenders, so I wasn't part of them, so I didn't say anything. And then they came for me, and there was no one left. So that was Martin Niemöller. From 1937 to 1945, he was in the Sachsenhausen and Dachau prison concentration camps. He probably wasn't killed because he was a war hero from World War I. But Hans and Sophie Scholl were not so lucky. These were a brother and sister, Hans and Sophie. There's a feature film called Sophie Scholl, which you might see. It streams, I think it's on Netflix, I'm not sure. Scholl is S-C-H-O-L-L. They were students in their 20s at the University of Munich, and they had reached the breaking point with the regime. And this is at the height of Nazi power in the early 1940s. And they got a stenography machine and some kind of printing press, and they started, printing leaflets and writing graffitis on the walls. The most famous one is, "Every word that comes out of Hitler's mouth is a lie." You can just think of someone today and just change the name of the politician, and you might have some resonance. And they were spreading these pamphlets around campus. Enormous risk, and ultimately they were arrested and beheaded. They were sent to the guillotine. But they had said, "Genug, this is enough. We can't take it anymore." And so they stood up, as Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who said, another German theologian of the period, who said, "Not to speak against evil is to be part of evil." And it was Orwell in 1984 who said of the proles, their silence is consent. Their silence is consent. So this is not a time for any of us to be good Germans, to look the other way. Oh, I didn't know what was happening. Gee, I thought that family went on vacation. I wonder why they didn't come back. What does that mean? Why are the stormtroopers in the streets? Why did the Gestapos break down doors? I didn't know. I minded my own business. We cannot be like that. And I know many of you here in this community are not. You are engaged in one way or another with acts of resistance. But it's in community, it's in collectivity, where we gather strength, where we gather a force that cannot be resisted. And that's why it's important to come together in meetings like this, not necessarily because I'm here, but you see your neighbors, you see friends, you make new friends. I hope you make some connections here, and perhaps in the Q&A session you can tell me about what's going on here, what demonstration is happening, what meeting is happening, what 350.org is doing here. Is there a Black Lives Matter here? Is there Rise Up? Are there different groups here in Santa Fe and in this general area? So that's really important. One of the things I learned about activism and public speaking is also from my friend and mentor Howard Zinn. Always inject a little bit of humor. So I know this is a little bit out of sequence, but I'll attribute that to being a double Gemini.
Hallelujah.
I kind of skip around. Those of you who are Gemini understand the joke. If you don't, forget about it. But Howard Zinn always said, inject a little bit of humor. So I invented this character a couple of years ago. Some of you may have heard about him. He was a very distinguished and erudite journalist. His name is Dick Veneer. I see you know him well. Dun, 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 dun. We interrupt this program from the CCA in Santa Fe, New Mexico, to bring you this breaking news story from TIBC, the Truth in Broadcasting Corporation, from our world corporate headquarters in our secure, state-of-the-artless underground studios in Roswell, New Mexico. I'm Dick Veneer, your glib and banal anchor of Facade News. Facade News, the 24/7 newscast dedicated to keeping you in the dark. We go straight to the surface of a story and we stay there. We make things up as we go along. The highest standards of journalism, unencumbered by elite concepts like the truth. Our reporters are dedicated to giving you fake news all the time, with a thorough disregard for facts. Our credos, unfair and unbalanced. We deceive, you believe. Ladies and gentlemen, an amazing story coming across our news desk at this very moment. Our exalted leader has determined that 2 and 2 is 5. He told Facade News in an exclusive interview that after much soul-searching and deep consultations with his daughter and son-in-law, that he now concludes that long-held views of 2 plus 2 is 4 are wrong. He described the process while playing golf and said it was amazing and unbelievable. And he said the people love the tremendous math work we are doing. The great leader modestly added, I give myself a 10. I'm a very stable genius. Stay tuned for updates on this and other breaking stories right here on Facade News. I'm Dick Veneer, your still glib and banal anchor, and reminding you, believe our news or else. And now back to your regularly scheduled broadcast in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Well, there is a huge problem with, thank you for that. Dick appreciates the applause. I'm sure his ratings will skyrocket. But I have to tell you, I've been using Dick Veneer and Facade News for 5, 6, 7 years now. But in the last year or so, as things have gotten so morbid here in the country, and with all the problems emanating from the Oval Office and elsewhere, people don't laugh as much. You know, in some ways, oh, he said 2 and 2 is 5? That's plausible. Yeah, why not? He says other outrageous things. In fact, last night there was a report marking the completion of 2 years of the great prevaricator in office. And the Washington Post announced that they had documented, I think, 8,100 lies, if I'm not mistaken. But you know, we're off base, forgive me for saying this, if we concentrate solely on the egregious, outrageous excrement, you know, emanating from the mouth of the great prevaricator. He is a symptom of something much deeper. And if we just deal with surface problems, then we're inviting ourselves for future incarnations of such a political leader. I was in New Orleans about a month ago and went to the Huey Long Museum. You all know The Kingfish? You know how Robert Penn Warren's great novel, All the King's Men? A great political novel, actually, written in 1946. It's modeled after the life of Huey Long. He was a senator from Louisiana and assassinated in 1935. He said, he didn't say if, he said when fascism comes to the United States of America, it will come with a Bible and an American flag. You could see those tropes manifesting themselves, you know, particularly emanating from the vice president's office. You know, again, any of you who get very excited about maybe impeaching the great prevaricator, be warned. There's somebody, you know, behind the curtain who might be even more dangerous. Hard to believe. But Pence, I will use his name, when he was the governor of Indiana, tried to close the Planned Parenthood offices in that state. Extreme right-wing kind of Taliban religious ideas that he has. He doesn't believe in gay marriage. His wife is now working at a charter school where you cannot attend if you're gay or you're transgender or anything like that. He's against gay marriage and on and on. You have to wonder, as he sits there or stands there next to his great leader, sycophancy has taken on a new meaning with Pence, where he just stands, says nothing, barely moves, and occasionally nods his head up and down in agreement with whatever prevarication comes from the great leader's mouth. There was a recent study that Mother Jones published that links hours of news consumption to overall levels of fear and anxiety. It's really interesting, The more you consume of news, there's a correlation to more fear and more anxiety. So I think we need to be careful about what we consume and the amount of it, because the internet is a trap. Just like these phones are a trap. You go into it and you'll never come out. Oh, look at this article. She just forwarded this to me. Let me pass this along. Oh, isn't this interesting? I didn't know this. My friend will be interested. Let me send it on. And pretty soon, all will become our extensions of our thumb. And again, I think it's good to have the information, but unless we act on that information, it's in turn, and it's paralyzing us. It demobilizes. It has a demobilizing effect. We are in a permanent war situation. The war on terror is ongoing. And that is, by design, because it is a cover for imperial acquisition of more and more resources and control. Again, going back to what's happening now is not entirely new in American history. In 1882, there was the Chinese Exclusion Act. The Chinese in the 1880s were the Latin Americans, Central Americans of today. They were demonized, they were stigmatized, they were humiliated, they were insulted, and there was, all kinds of immigration, deportations of them. There have been waves of this in U.S. history over the decades. Woodrow Wilson, who's admired by many as a great liberal democratic president from 1912 to 1920, he said this: "There are citizens of the United States who have poured the poison of disloyalty into the very arteries of our national life. Such creatures," he said, "of disloyalty and anarchy must be crushed out." And then the Secretary of State around that same period, Elihu Root, he was also senator from New York, he said this in 1917: "There are men, I should say men and women, walking about the streets of this city, New York, tonight, who ought to be taken out at sunrise tomorrow and shot. There are some newspapers published in this city every day, the editors of which deserve conviction and execution for treason." So there is, a history of demonization, of attacking the media, attacking the free press. You have the, great prevaricator calling people like me the enemy of the people. Enemy of the people is right out of Stalin and Goebbels' mouths. That's the kind of language that was used in those totalitarian dictatorships. And now it's happening here with very few people actually standing up and resisting. And I'm part of that, media galaxy. And by the way, you can hear alternative radio on KSFR every Saturday morning at 9, and on KUNM also on Saturdays from 6 to 7. Now we're going to have a little commercial break, which is always the oddest and most bizarre part of any presentation I give. I talked about that Martin Luther King speech in New York at Riverside Church called Beyond Vietnam. There's our CD here about that. Talking about resistance is a talk about Fannie Lou Hamer. It's a great program. She was a dirt-poor cotton farmer, a sharecropper from Mississippi, who stood up against Lyndon Johnson and the National Democratic Party in 1964. I happened to be in Atlantic City protesting at the time and to seat the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party against the party of James Eastland, against the party of Strom Thurmond, against the Southern segregationists, and a remarkable life story of someone with very few advantages who was able to do so much. I did an interview in Hunter College a couple of months ago with Benjamin Hecht on how Hitler happened. Again, it's what is remarkable about the rise of Nazism is the context of the Weimar Republic, which saw a flourishing of intellectual and artistic and scientific life which unparalleled anywhere in the world at the time. I'm talking about Fritz Lang, making films, Metropolis, for example, Thomas Mann, Walter Gropius of the Bauhaus. 70 or 80%, I forget the exact figure, of all scientific papers in the 1920s were written in German. It was the lead language of higher education. There was Kurt Weill, there was Lotte Lenya, there was Bertolt Brecht and his great poetry, and on the backs of that rose the Nazi Party. So this is an interview I'm very proud of. It's going to be published in the Sun magazine in the coming months, but you can get the 1-hour CD. Then I did an interview in Montezuma, New Mexico, at the World College there, United World College, with Arjun Singh Sethi. He's a remarkable, terrific Indian, South Asian scholar, and he talks about the politics of hate. And then I have a lot of trouble with the revolution. Anyway, long story short, 5 alternative radio CDs. If you got them from me in Boulder, it'd be like $80 here, they're $20. It's stealing, so please steal. I have to do my best New York huckster kind of imitation. There are free copies of alternative radio catalogs. And then I have something which connects a lot to what I'm talking about this evening. It's a pre-publication order form to a book that I did with Edward Said that had gone out of print because the publisher went bankrupt. It's called Culture and Resistance. It'll be out in a couple of weeks if you sign up for it, and here, and then I can mail it to you as soon as the book comes out. Culture and Resistance, by one of the great scholar activists of this period, died in 2003, but still, if you read his words, like the words of Martin Luther King Jr., they ring true, have tremendous resonance today. And again, going back to optimism, pessimism, our optimism must be rooted in reality and not in wishful thinking. And Rebecca Solnit, who's a terrific writer, great writer actually, she says, an optimist thinks everything will be fine no matter what, and that justifies doing nothing. But hopefulness means that we don't know what's going to happen, and in that uncertainty, there is room to act. There's always room to act. The final curtain has not come down yet on humanity or on us. And as Leonard Cohen said in Anthem, ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light goes in. So we have to float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, as Muhammad Ali said. We have to find those little openings and pour energy into them and make them as wide as possible, and then to connect with others as well. And one thing, of course, to overcome is the narcissism of small differences. Again, a quote from that guy Marx. How we eliminate connecting with other people for small reasons, like they eat meat, they drive a Dodge Ram, they don't bike to work, they don't walk, they voted for Nader, or they voted for Hillary, or they didn't vote. Anyway, I'm not going to talk to you. Well, it's like that Martin Niemöller poem. Pretty soon there's nobody left to talk to. I've eliminated you, there's nobody left. Finding common ground and working in unity to advance a progressive agenda is something. And this doesn't mean selling out and embracing, white supremacists or neo-Nazis. Of course not. It's about finding, kindred spirits. And most people want affordable health care. This is not a left-wing issue. You ask anyone if they want affordable health care. Ask people in rural areas of this state or in Colorado, as I have done, where clinics and emergency rooms have closed. They have to go to Albuquerque to get any kind of medical attention. They have to go to Denver to get any kind of medical attention because of the shrinking of the public sector. Same thing with schools being consolidated, money's being cut, teachers being squeezed. I mean, right now there's a major teacher action in Los Angeles. Again, it has a lot to do with income inequality, but also the fact that charter schools are draining a lot of the federal budget that should be going to public schools. Despair is an indulgent and despicable bourgeois affectation. You must not allow it. So says Tauseno, John Nichols, in The Magic Journey. And Galeano, Eduardo Galeano, who was in Santa Fe a couple of times, he won a Lannan Award, great writer, humanist, journalist, And again, his book, Open Veins of Latin America, which actually I don't have with me, but I have in boulder, multiple copies. Hint. He said he saw a graffiti once in Latin America. It said, "Save despair for better times." And that should be our guidance there, of saving that. When we turn this Titanic around, if we can turn it around, because the iceberg is right in front of it. It's interesting how this metaphor is being used because the climate is warming and the seas are rising and the icebergs are melting, yet we use this iceberg and Titanic metaphor as an example of what we're going through. Maybe Moby Dick and Ahab is more to the point. This is my interpretation, the white whale being Mother Nature, being purity, and Ahab being rapacious capitalism, which has to destroy the whale, that seeks vengeance on the whale because it had wounded Ahab. So you have this monomaniacal drive to kill this beautiful animal, and we are in the sixth stage of extinction. Read Elizabeth Colbert's book, The Sixth Extinction. We are in that moment right now. This is not something in 2130. This is the lives of you and your children and your grandchildren. That's what's happening to the planet right now, and unless that ship is turned around, whether it's the Pequod or if it's the Titanic, there is going to be hell to pay for the planet. And we've seen all kinds of examples of what can happen in terms of the firestorms, in terms of the floods, the increasing intensity, hurricanes, tornadoes, all of these things happening right in front of our eyes. What will future generations say of this generation if we just looked away and said, we let it happen? Or I didn't know what was going on, or I was too busy, or I was, involved. And we all have excellent excuses, My mother was dying, I had to take care of her. I was working 3 jobs. Yes, all of those things are true. But finding a way, as Gandhi did in India, as King did in this country, as other great freedom fighters have done, finding a way to insert yourself into that space and making it a little bit wider. And it was Emma Goldman, one of those who was persecuted by Woodrow Wilson, and deported in the Great Red Scare of 1919 and 1920. She said, "Art has the power to make ideas felt." And finally, Henry James said, "Art is the shadow of humankind." We're going to start with a short poem from Pakistan. It's a poem written in Urdu, so I know there's a large Urdu-speaking contingent here. A very powerful, beautiful language which combines Indian folk languages with Arabic, Persian, Turkish, and other languages. It's the national language of Pakistan. It's spoken in Kashmir and parts of North India. The greatest Urdu poet of the 20th century was Faiz Ahmed Faiz. It's unusual, his first name and last name is the same, F-A-I-Z. He died in 1984, he was born in 1911. He was a journalist and proud of it. He was a communist and proud of it. He was a prisoner in one of the many military dictatorships that the United States backed in Pakistan, and he was proud of that. And he was a great poet, and his most famous poem is called Bol, B-O-L. So now you know the imperative in Hindi and Urdu. It's the imperative to speak. So Bol. And if you go to a demonstration, not just in Pakistan, but in India, even in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and in Nepal, you see placards, people holding up signs saying Bol, and they know it's this particular poem. Bol ke lab azad hai tere, bol zaban ka ab tak teri hai. Speak, your lips are free. Speak, your tongue is still yours. This magnificent body is still yours. Speak, your life is still yours. Speak, there is little time, but little though it is enough time, enough before the body perishes, before the tongue atrophies. Speak, the truth still lives. Say what you have to say. Speak, your lips are free. Bol, bol, bol. Phase out of phase. W.H. Auden is one of the great poets of the 20th century. He wrote this poem. It's way too long for me to read. It's called September 1st, 1939. Those of you who know your history, you'll recall that was the day that Hitler sent his armies into Poland, and it was the beginning of World War I. And he writes this, as he says, I sit in one of the dives on 52nd Street in New York. And he says, all I have is a voice to undo the folded lie. We must love one another or die. Defenseless under the night, our world in stupor lies. Yet dotted everywhere, ironic points of light flash out wherever the just exchange their messages. May I, composed like them of eros and of dust, beleaguered by the same negation and despair, show an affirming flame. Auden. This was written by Linda Bacchiel, not a household name. She's a criminal defense attorney in San Juan, Puerto Rico. She wrote this during the disgraceful Kavanaugh hearings. If a woman's word had weight, these things would not happen. He pinched, he squeezed, he cupped, he thrust. He didn't ask, I didn't scream. He said, keep your mouth shut or else. Who remembers Anita Hill, prosecutor, professor, reduced to an audience for preening penis jokes, sitting ramrod straight with the truth to tell to stopped up ears in dark suits? She only said, I had to tell the truth. I could not keep silent. Her truth made them squirm, but her words did not tip the balance. If a woman's words had weight, these things would not happen. Talking about Christine Blasey Ford. And I think, it's salutary that a lot of these misogynists have been flushed from the deep recesses of their caves, like Leslie Moonves, the head of CBS, who's now contesting for a $120 million package bailout. How's that? If you lose your job, accused of molesting and abusing women, you might get $120 million. Anyway, by the way, he's the one who said during the presidential campaign in 2016, he said Donald Trump is bad for the country. He knew that. He's talking to a bunch of stockholders of CBS in Washington. But he said, you know what? He's great for corporate profits. And so we're making money hand over fist. Because that's what they were parading in front of us, this showman, Barnum and Bailey type ringmaster. And they got billions and billions of dollars of free publicity for him and billions of dollars in revenue for CBS. So Bill Cosby, Charlie Rose, Bill O'Reilly, Roger Ailes, Harvey Weinstein, all of them. But think of the millions of others whose names we'll never know, who will never be outed, and of the women who were targeted, I suspect women in this audience. What justice, will be there for them? Linda Bacchiel. Marge Piercy is one of my favorite poets. She lives a lot. She's still alive. She writes for the Monthly Review. Howard Zinn loved her poetry very much, and again, through Zinn, I learned about Piercy. She wrote a poem called We Give Up Far Too Easily. Why do people get so discouraged about political action? You take a vitamin pill and imagine they'll do something for you, right? You don't say, I'll never wash the dishes again because they'll just get dirty. We all mumble silly prayers into the air. Oh, please don't let me miss the plane. Oh, please let him call me back. Inaction certainly will work fine for the overlords who own our work, control our lives, consider us collateral loss in their grand schemes. They only fear masses in motion. Inaction will certainly work fine for the overlords who own our work. They only fear masses in motion. A little at a time is the way forward. An unending dance, 2 steps forward, 1.5 back. Sitting on your ass too long makes you one. Marge Piercy. And this is another Piercy poem that I'm very fond of. It's from her collection, The Moon is Always Female. It's called The Low Road. I've read this before in Santa Fe, but I think it's been so many years, perhaps you've forgotten it. It's a poem about solidarity. It's exactly what I've been talking about this evening and the need for solidarity. The low road. Alone you can fight, you can refuse, you can take what revenge you can, but they roll over you. But two people fighting back can cut through a mob. Two people can keep each other sane, can give support, conviction, love, massage, hope, sex. Three people are a delegation, a committee, a wedge. With four, you can play bridge and start an organization. With six, you can rent a whole house, eat pie for dinner with no seconds, and hold a fundraising party. A dozen make a demonstration, 100 fill a hall. It goes on one at a time. It starts when you care to act. It starts when you do it again after they say no. It starts when you say we and know who you mean. And each day you mean one more. March Piercy. Frederick Douglass, great abolitionist. Apparently the great leader thinks he's still alive. Last year during, I'm not making this up, he said that Douglass is doing terrific work. It's really reaching a lot of people. A great abolitionist, freedom fighter, he gave these words on August 4th, 1857. If there's no struggle, there's no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom, yet deprecate agitation, are men and women who want crops without plowing the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the roar of its mighty waters. The struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both moral and physical. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. Frederick Douglass. And finally, is our dear friend Arundhati Roy of India. He's been to Santa Fe several times. It was mentioned in the introduction. I'm banned from India because I have the nerve and the gumption and the chutzpah to write about Kashmir, which is a site of enormous human rights violations and atrocities carried out by the liberal regime in New Delhi. This goes with the previous regime of Manmohan Singh and the current regime of Narendra Modi and the Bharatiya Janata Party. There's a lot of things I could talk about India all night for hours and hours, but they have won the propaganda largely in this country of thinking that everybody's playing sitar and practicing yoga, and they live in ashrams and are vegetarians and all of that, and study Hari Om, etc. It's a flawed country like all other countries, so it's good to disabuse ourselves of fantasies we may be holding on, whether it's our own country or some other country as well. But this is words of advice from, and she says this humbly, because she's not a citizen of the United States. But she said, for resistance, it has to begin here. For universal resistance, it has to begin here in America. The only institution more powerful than the US government is American civil society. The rest of us, she says, are subjects of slave nations. We are by no means powerless, but you have the power of proximity. You have access to the imperial palace and the emperor's chambers. Empire's conquests are being carried out in your name, and you have the right to refuse. You can refuse to fight, refuse to move those missiles from the warehouse to the dock, refuse to wave that flag, refuse the victory parade. You have a rich tradition of resistance. I hate to disagree with your president, Arundhati Roy says, but yours is by no means a great nation. But you could be a great people. History is giving you the chance. Seize the time. Thank you very much.